All right, so we're live.
And so we are.
This is the first episode for us of our little podcast experiment. So why don't we talk about why we're doing this? Like what's one of the things that got you engaged in this project with me?
Um, I think for me it was pretty clear in the early onset of our sort of relationship that we struck up that we had a mutual way of approaching our discussions around different socio-political issues. Um, and for me, that's something that I've always wanted to be able to speak to a little bit more because I felt that modern discourse was too centric on being overly flashy, or nowadays you see rage bait content, and rather than actually being focused on educating people, giving people objective information while making it entertaining, it was more about the entertainment itself. I feel most political commentators do a disservice to political commentary, and I think it has a direct negative impact on how people process political information, how people process political media, and makes it really difficult for us to actively seek and ask for the right things as we move forward. Most people, being in the US currently, seem to be coming to a more mutual understanding that there are a lot of problems that we're facing and a lot of things that we may be asking for but aren't even close to getting. And I think one of the biggest issues is that we're not understanding the right way to ask, and we're not understanding exactly what's going on. So my aim is to help disseminate that information of what I do know, help kind of grow with the audience to forge a better understanding of how media literacy directly ties into your ability to be a productive citizen and somebody that can actually help bring your community around you forward, both in small and larger scale. So yeah, that's kind of my primary initiative, so to speak, or aim. But I think it will also just stem to the fact that I met somebody, in your case, that had perspectives that I didn't have, but we had a similar end game or end goal, so that for me was kind of the primary motivating factor.
Yeah, I mean that's hard to follow up. Yeah, I agree with all that. Also, one of the things I've noticed that happened, you kind of alluded to it, is that it's people can't have these conversations anymore seemingly without it turning into something really negative. Um, I see like a lot of people stuck in echo chambers. I see like a lot of radicalization that happens. I know personally people that have been radicalized either to the far right or to the far left. Um, so I think the ability to not just see information, but to fully understand the information. Sometimes I feel like you have to synthesize the information for people, kind of extrapolate the true meaning of that, or even reduce it to its like most reductionist take, I guess. You hear me say that a lot in real life, but I think some people just, what's the saying? Some people need milk and some people need steak. So I agree with
Yeah,
you. I think everyone has like different starting points, and it's important to create either a community or a platform where you can meet people where they're at, and regardless of where they're at, they could either learn to build the skills of media literacy, or being in proximity enough to it, I feel like they'll just kind of naturally like they'll learn how to disseminate information for themselves.
yeah,
I don't know
definitely.
if that makes sense.
No, it does. It absolutely does. I think the other thing that you and I guess another way to summarize our mission from conversations that we've had is that we both also want to stress that we feel like we're in a position where the needle needs to move, and this constant being strung up by this insane bipartisanship that's frankly, to use maybe some hyperbole here, poisoning political progress in this country. I think it's so obsessed with keeping the hamster in the wheel, so to speak, that you and I both agree, although we have different perspectives as to why we agree on this, that conversations need to both be productive, but they also need to be pushing those envelopes. They need to be pushing the boundaries of what's being discussed, and the more level-headedness that you come from it, and the more times you have the conversation, the more open you are about having it, the further along you can go. And right now, we're just not seeing that enough.
True, which is why we're gonna do one of the things that's gonna make this super fun is we're not gonna tell the audience what our political alignments are because it shouldn't actually matter if we're talking about progress.
Yeah, exactly. The points are the points. You can agree or disagree with them. We can, allude to certain things that we want to see, and people are going to inevitably make their judgments based on that, because that's kind of also one of the points, right? That's what we're trying to illuminate, is even as we sit here, two people not really disclosing our direct political leanings, the audience or anyone who watches it or comes across our points is going to feel compelled to find the box to put us in. And that's kind of the issue that we're trying to resolve, or one of the things we're trying to resolve, is this is two people having a conversation. It's not a structured debate team where you have team one versus team two and they have to be on opposite sides of a conversation. This is two people opening a dialogue in what I feel is one of the more, open forum, more progressive ways possible. Even that word I just used, that's gonna raise flags in people, I just know it.
Triggered. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I'm excited to see what happens. My ask for the audience is if you disagree with something that you hear, don't just go into the comments and be like, you guys are wrong and you guys are stupid because, or you guys are right. Tell us why. Like, engage with the actual arguments. I think it's good for everybody. It's healthy discourse. So, and that's something that's unfortunately lacking nowadays. So,
Yeah. If we became known as the community that had the longest replies and comment threads because people were giving well thought out and reasoned rational arguments, I think that would be a win in both of our eyes.
sick, dude. That'd be awesome. Yeah. I don't think it will happen. I'm a bit of a cynic. I don't think it would happen, but that would be amazing. So,
All right. And I know that it's, right now it's March here and we're talking about moving forward and things like that, but I know you and I both discussed it being our first episode or first attempt into this realm here. We wanted to briefly go over some things that happened last year and kind of how they set the stage for this year going forward. It being an election year and whatnot, there's obviously a lot to talk about. Feels like not being able to do this full time just yet is a bit of a almost difficult because there's just constant news cycle, the 24-hour news cycle, especially in the US. Political news is going to be popping up left and right, but I do think it would be meaningful for us to go over 2023 and then what we see going forward in 2024.
yeah, and just for the audience sake, what we did is we just picked a handful of points that were meaningful takeaways for us and why we think that that's like important things to discuss, and then we're just gonna have a quick conversation about it, and then we're gonna move on to things that we hope to see in 2024, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So do you wanna start us off with like what was one of your key takeaways from 2023? Either like positive, negative, something that just stuck with you.
Well, one thing I will go over, and I mean, some of these things are, I'm not going to try to go for the obvious low-hanging fruit news stories. We all know about conflicts that are currently going on that we feel need more attention and should be discussed more in depth than just simply mentioning them in a recap. I mean, we know about Israel-Palestine, we know about Russia-Ukraine, we know about all these things currently going on with the Houthis and whatnot. So those are going to be things that we specifically revisit and go in more in depth on. So right now we're just doing some more of a brief overview on other things that we thought were important. So to start off for me, I think it would be just a brief overview of how destructive Congress has been in the last 12 months alone. I mean, something that I was just had to reaffirm for myself today after going through the list of people that were either censured or you have, one person out as speaker, replaced. That's never happened in history. You have Santos being banned from Congress. He's only the 6th person to ever have that happen to. Outside of that, you had a Congress that, on the broad scheme of things, didn't really do that much. the rampant bipartisan issues that are plaguing the country in a year in which there is so much on the table and so much being asked for leading up to an election year in 2023, now 2024. We passed 27 bills into law. Now, for those that may not be unfamiliar, because I had to do a little bit of research on this myself, that is by far the lowest number since the Great Depression. So post-Great Depression, that is by far the lowest amount of bills that have been passed.
Wait. Say that again. So this is the least productive they've been since the Great Depression in terms of legislation passed.
Correct.
That's insane.
Yes. One of those was to make a commemorative coin. Two of them were.
I'm sorry. Wait. What?
Yeah.
Was it a Trump coin?
No.
Oh, okay.
It was it was I believe it was the 250th anniversary of the United States Marine Corps. So
okay.
Not exactly saying it was a bad cause, but of all the things that we're trying to focus on, if you had to go to any US citizen and say, you only get 27 things passed into law this year, what do you want? I don't think anyone's going to say a commemorative coin for any organization whatsoever.
True.
Two of those, outside of this, so we have one accounted for, two of them were strictly dedicated to the renaming of different medical facilities for veteran treatment. Again, I'm all for memorializing and giving, credit where credit's due to individuals that have served their country, but of 27 things, really? That's, now we're down to 23 already, 24 already, and we haven't done anything. And I read this list. I even read it all today. I was going back and forth with you earlier.
Yeah.
I was going down the list.
For the audience, so you understand, this doesn't end for us. This doesn't stop. We're constantly texting each other or putting this in our Discord chat, and we're having sidebars most days. So
yeah. And I'm just fastidiously trying to go through this because I'm like, surely there is something. And I'll be honest, I got nothing. I got absolutely nothing. I got more frustration than I got any meaningful discourse from things passed in 2023. So, just to further contextualize this with numbers, in 2023, the House held 724 votes. 27 bills were passed to law. Now, I know those things aren't necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio, but it feels like something's out of proportion there.
100%. Do you know what those votes were on?
So, unfortunately, I couldn't get clarity to get a more of like a listed form on everything that was included in those 724. I'm sure if I dug deeper, because I was going deep through Congress's website, different government websites, and even outside government to try and get it, but most of the information is primarily focused on what they did pass, not what they didn't do anything with. I'm sure a hefty amount of those votes, as we all know, are, anti-ceasefire agreements and whatnot, things related to procuring funding for things like the border situation or for Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, etc., etc. So I'm sure there's a lot of it in there, and the 724 is probably inflated to maybe sound a little bit worse than it is, but I need people to understand that even if it's not as bad as that, it's still bad. 27 bills passed into law is hilariously bad.
So you said you read the whole list?
I did, yeah.
If we're playing the charitability card, what do you think was the most productive thing that you saw on that list?
I mean, over half of them are laws that have now been put into place to get more medical care for veterans. There was a law passed that allowed for more healthcare rights for children and grandchildren of Vietnam veterans that are born with birth defects. So these things are very meaningful and very important, but I found that in terms of amidst the current political climate in the United States, those were probably the most meaningful. There were some very dense ones that were passed that have a litany of stipulations based on spending, raising the budget, keeping the government operating, which seems to be something that has to happen every 6 months to a year, because they apparently keep running out every time. And those I don't really count, because as much as those are meaningful, it feels like those are the votes that happen all the time. They they lose their meaning when they're constantly being voted for.
Yeah. And I'm gonna be honest, maybe this is my cynical nature taking over, but um you said this was all passed last year, right? The 27?
Yes.
I feel like because the last couple of years Republicans have almost universally voted against quality of life improvements for veterans. Like there was that bill that Biden that put forward about helping soldiers that had come into contact with chemicals, specifically like burn pits, and universally every single Republican voted against it. I feel as if, and these are just feelings, I'm not substantiating any of this with facts or anything. It just seems like they know that there's an election right around the corner. So by them voting for these things or having bipartisanship on these issues, they'll just use it as a platform to try and get the military's vote. Because the military resoundingly voted against Trump the last election.
Yeah. Well, and now we've got the new Speaker of the House who is quoted saying that God spoke to him to tell him that he was becoming the next Moses, or to prepare to be the next Moses, something
You
to that effect.
you mean the gentleman that said that school shootings today is a result of taking biblical teachings out of school and teaching
Yeah.
evolution? That guy?
Yeah, surprisingly, that guy's house has shot down a lot of legislation, and not a lot of meaningful things have come through. Um,
Interesting. That
which
doesn't
is,
sound very Christian. Interesting.
yeah, well, Jesus was not a lawmaker, so he's disqualified for the conversation, I suppose.
Oh no. Oh man.
But yeah, so, and just again, kind of using some of that to throw out the just absolute battering that our Congress is taking, but it's all self-inflicted wounds. I mean, it's allowing itself to run rampant with corruption. As I said earlier, you have people being banned from Congress and kicked out of Congress, which is historically not very common. Again, the Speaker of the House being voted out, essentially betrayed by his own party, to try and put more MAGA sympathetic people into the position. Santos is just running away with everyone's money, taking bribe
Literally.
after bribe after bribe.
Literally.
Even to this day, we're not even sure where he is. Everyone check your wallets.
Wasn't there someone alleged that he stole from their mother, right? One of the congressmen.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like if you put all of it together, I wouldn't have enough space. I'd need an archive of the complaints that were alleged against him. So, it's just and
That
again,
man is walking content. I'm sorry.
No, he really is, and he loves it. I mean, for anyone who saw, I can't remember her name, that one interview that he did recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, he openly admits it.
What's her name? Starts with a Z.
Yeah.
Ziwi or something like that. You know who? Yeah. I know who you're talking
I feel
about.
bad that I forget it now.
I'll post her. I'll make sure it pops up in the edit.
Definitely, yeah. Everyone, make sure to give that a listen, because it's entertaining if nothing else, if not a little bit sad.
I'll also include the list in the description of all of the 27 bills that you're mentioning. So.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I'll make sure to feed information so that way we got all that for reference. There are some, like I said, just to be clear, there are some that are very dense and have a lot of information in them, so feel free to pour them in. The one that had the most information in it, I believe, and I had to try to scroll through but not too quickly, was just a bill that went into law that was rescinding all of the funding efforts that were allocated for COVID-19 response. So again, going back to talking about moving the needle, that was really more of just a rescinding of something that was happening, not a progression towards something else.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm still processing this, to be honest with you.
I know it. Like I said, I went over it again today because I was stunned and frankly was not sure I was reading things correctly. But yeah, 27 bills into law. There is a famous quote while I was sifting through looking for this information. I think it was Truman that said, hold on, I'm going to see if I can find it now. He essentially had a quote that said something to the effect of, Congress was this sort of self-canceling out measure, and that they were struggling to being able to getting anything done because they were so insistent on canceling each other out. But even that year, the year that he said it, which I think was either 47 or 48, again, I'm going to try to find the quote in the post so people can have better reference, but they passed over 500 bills into law in the year that he made that quote. So, still, contextually, nothing really since the Great Depression has been like what we're seeing now. And I gotta be honest, I don't feel very confident that it's going to be better going forward into 2024.
You know what makes this? I don't know. I feel like this underlines the egregiousness of what you're describing. Guess how much, on average, these senators and House representatives make?
I mean, it's got to be 300,000-400,000, right?
Not quite, but I mean, sure, if you account for like lobbying deals and things like that that go on the side, but their base is 174K. Base.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if
I'd take that job.
100%, yeah. So, and the House Speaker gets 223K base.
Gotcha.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Do you think McCarthy gets all that 220 base, or is he kicked out of that since it was so fresh?
I don't know, actually. Funny enough, I think that they probably have to pay him a certain amount for a certain amount of time, but a lot of these people just go on to make millions and millions of dollars in the private sector when they're done anyway.
Yeah,
or as
I wonder how that
consultants.
manifests. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no idea.
Yeah, well, and it's almost like there's something that all members of Congress seem to agree on, and that's that they love utilizing their position to bolster stock portfolios. But that's perhaps a separate conversation.
It is a separate conversation, because I will say this though before we move on. That's a conversation we should absolutely have. There was a guy who had a social media following, and he was following like Nancy Pelosi's political moves, like her public tradings, and that guy said that she made him a ton of money.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, follow Pelosi and go against Jim Cramer, I think is the two laws of stock trading now.
Yeah, man. Forget financial literacy. Just do what Pelosi does. Awesome.
The last piece that I'll say that I want to elaborate or visit back to the Truman thing I spoke about earlier. So he coined the term "do nothing Congress" was famously coined by former President Harry S. Truman in 1948. That year, Congress passed 511 bills that were signed into law. The last 10 Congresses averaged 391 bills signed into law per term, leading up to Truman's presidency that signed 511. Last year we got 27. So good job, everybody.
Gross. Crazy, man.
But how about you? I've been going over just my initial guttural reaction to 2023 minus some of the more international stories. So what really set you off last year, or what piqued your interest?
Well, I have some negatives. I do have a positive, but funny enough, leading from this one's going to be negative though. Leading from what you just discussed, I think it ties in perfectly, and at least on a smaller degree. And it's the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment. And the reason why I think it's important is not, or at least to discuss, like why it stuck with me, is it wasn't just the harm that was done immediately, but it was like I'm watching these politicians have nothing of substance to say, and no one's doing anything to help these people. And I think that it was one of these big problems that underlines a much larger, long-standing issue. And that issue is that train derailments happen all the time, like all the time. And I think that's like I guess you could say the failure of not just like the people that are supposed to represent us, but specifically Trump and Biden. Like Trump eviscerated a whole lot of regulations when it came to like trains and safety, and then Biden totally screwed over the rail workers union in 2022. So I feel like it was just kind of like the perfect storm of failures on full display for everybody.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because the first thing that comes to my mind, as much as I want to harp on Trump and the things that he took away that had an immediate domino effect in the railway infrastructure. Because again, you mentioned it, yeah, East Palestine being the most prominent example, but I mean, how many train derailments happen every year? I mean, the funny thing is that people were coming into comments on Twitter and all these different political spaces to elaborate and to clarify that, oh, our railway infrastructure gets destroyed constantly. This is fine. This is status quo. Not understanding that that in itself is the problem. But yeah, the thing that really gets me the most, now we're talking about 2022, is Joe Biden essentially saying, no, you don't have the right to strike. That your job is so important that you actually don't get to give your input on the things that you need. Like, I don't know, what was it? Oh yeah, sick days. 7 sick days for an entire calendar year. Nope, sorry, back to work. We don't want to hear that.
Yeah, that whole thing was a circus, to say the least. And also, what I didn't really mention this, but it can't be overstated. It also shows just how little corporations give a damn. Not just in terms about the workers, but also in terms about like safety regulations. Because there's no one, i.e., like the Senate, representatives, politicians, no one's holding these people accountable.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they get slapped with a $200 million fine every once in a while. That money never even sees the victims that suffered at the hands of their corruption and their greed. I'm not going to call it oversight because I feel like a lot of these companies understand what they're overlooking and doing it on purpose because there really is no consequence. So to call it oversight almost gives them some sort of grace that they just made an accident. No, they were intentionally negligent. There's a huge difference. And the fact that we have no foundation, no structure in this country for bringing those corporations to direct justice in any meaningful long-term way, it's sickening. I mean, it's clear where the power is. It's clear who's at the top of the pyramid and who's at the bottom. And it's always been this way, but it just becomes more and more evident, despite the fact that we've been talking about it for so long.
Yeah, and I don't even know. Because like a lot of the settlements that get put out, I thought I'd read something several months back about there was one particular train derailment where when they went to pay restitution, these corporate lawyers argued that because the town, it was like somewhere in the Midwest, was basically a ghost town, it was dead, and there wasn't like a burgeoning amount of growth expected from that they should only have to pay X amount. And by the time that X amount, that lump sum was divided up, give or take, everyone only got $5.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. So.
Yeah. And then we talk about the ramifications from this, we talk about strikes. But of course, we can't forget the most important strike in America in the last 10 years, the one that people finally started caring about. And that was when a bunch of actors and writers decided that they weren't being treated properly by Hollywood. I mean, now all of a sudden everything comes to a halt because now these entertainers have something meaningful to say. And we're going to ignore the fact that they also have pockets deep enough to sustain them while they go through it. But their voices were heard. Their concerns were met. Not right away, mind you. This was one of the longer strikes in a long time, and one of the more costly ones, but it's amazing to me that there was such a direct impact at the consumer level, at the citizen level, once it meant that you couldn't see your movies, or you couldn't have the same quality of TV shows. Now all of a sudden it felt like there was a concerted effort and there was a dialogue across the entire nation around a strike. And frankly, the fact that I heard so much about this and so little about the railroad strikers back in 2022, yeah, it makes me almost at a loss for words.
I would agree. But and here's the sad part of all of this is I think if you account for all the presidents that have existed, I think Biden is classified as one of the most pro-worker presidents that we've had.
Yeah, it's what he runs on. I mean, you see him on Twitter. Well, him, if it's really him on Twitter. Whomever puts the thumbs to the screen. They're the ones that are talking about how he's the biggest pro-labor president in the last decade, the biggest pro-labor president in a long time. But you could go and directly see that outside of, job creation post-COVID, which, I'm not going to say that he didn't do that to a meaningful degree, and he's still working on it, but you have to put your money where your mouth is. You can't just say one thing and then completely do the opposite. I mean, granted, it's become a staple of American politics, especially the American presidency, but I'm so tired of Democratic voters, blue voters that refuse to acknowledge these things and admonish them. We should be admonishing anybody who doesn't hold true to what they actually claim to hold.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I just think that even if what they say is true, that he's the most pro-labor president, if not ever, that we've at least had in a very long time, because he's done things like support the auto workers or whatever. He prevented certain towns from being completely shut down and people having to sell their homes because the plants that they worked in were being closed. He reopened them or whatever. It's still, a lot of the things that he fails to do is so staggering. In my mind, it overshadows all of the positive that he's done, which again, it becomes a much larger issue. Like, he's doing a handful of things and people are crediting him as the most pro-labor president. So what the does that say about the state of the country that we live in, the state of the corporations and whatever freedom that they have? And I guess that for me, that was kind of like a huge red flag, a huge eye-opening moment.
Oh, definitely. I think for me, in the last 2 to 3 years, more so than at any other point in my life, it feels like things are sort of revealing themselves. I've been mentioning the fact that politicians are going mask off left and right, it feels like. We're completely, eroding any sort of facade or visage that existed, which, some people say is a good thing, but you got to make sure that the cost associated with that isn't so large that it has diminishing returns. But right now, a lot of things seem to be laid out on the table, and there's too much of it being revealed so nonchalantly without any sort of punishment on the back end of it, and I feel like that is what needs to change. Like, we can't just start having our politicians revealing the dirty deeds that they do, the money that they take, the lies that they tell. It's too much. At one point, you have to have accountability. Any basis of a strong democratic country has to be based on accountability for the things that are said and the leaders that are elected.
So what, in your mind, what would that accountability look like? I mean, I'm sure it ranges from fines or preventing for lobbying to prison time. I just didn't know if you had a general idea of what you would like to see happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, a lot of people would start with fines. The reason I'm not really a big fan of that is because, like you said, even though this was more about corporations and large-scale companies than it was about individuals, these people have enough money to throw at whatever problems they create in the first place. And unless that money's going somewhere tangible where you can actually, if they have to hand the money off to some poor person that they would have never supported with their power in the first place, then they might actually start to get scared. But that never really seems to be the case. So I gotta say, it depending on how bad it is, it should be prison, or just removal from your position. I know that we don't want to have this constant, power vacuum, vacation of position, paradigm, but right now we have so much that's off the mark that you have to be able to take what they're using, which is the power and the influence. That's what you have to go after. If you don't go after that, they're not going to care.
What was it that you told me that you liked the outline? It was a South American country, and you had to do this arduous task to become a representative for the people? What was that again?
I'm in the middle of reading a fantastic book by an author by the name of Dave Graeber called The Dawn of Everything. And what it is a book that details the history of, political structure and political thought throughout different civilizations. Was in sort of Mayan era Latin America, but not the Mayans themselves. And their parameters for if you were to become an elected official, a representative of your people, then they would essentially throw you in a jail cell with no food for 30 days. And within those 30 days, you had to fast, you had to endure direct, tangible physical and mental discomfort. You had to air your weaknesses and your intentions to the people. You had to essentially, verbally fillet yourself in front of everybody. You had to be so vulnerable that there was nobody in that town that didn't know who you were to your very soul. And if you were willing to go through those 30 days of discomfort and emerge out from your holding cell, essentially, only then would you have earned that title, rather than simply having enough people say, yeah, I want you to be in there. It was really more about, this is why I want to be in there, and I want to be in there so badly that I'm willing to submit myself to this level of torture, for lack of a better word, because I care that much about representing my people and my community.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they
I mean,
did it wild back then.
that would never that would never happen today. Could you imagine how the optics of that, throwing a bunch of the 90-year-old Congress people in a jail cell and starving them?
Yeah, well, the ones that can't make it,
Oh yeah.
we don't have to worry about them staying around too long.
That's true. I don't think they should be 90 years old and serving anyway, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a separate
definitely.
conversation.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But yeah, and then sort of, going on to other things that happened. Again, it was a year, I think it was, or I want to say it was a record year for labor strikes across the country. Just as a added little cliff note at the end there. But yeah, so the U.S. is definitely, the pot is starting to boil. You can definitely see the bubbling going on, and hopefully it doesn't result in anything overly dramatic in terms of, violence or anything like that. Obviously, no one's going to wish for that, but you can just tell that the heat's turning up, and now that we're going into an election year, I'm interested to see if that manifests in the labor force doubling down, which I would definitely hope to see, or if we're just going to roll over for the sake of hoping that the other guy doesn't win the election that we don't want to win, because, somehow it seems like all the issues get forgotten about when it's all about pulling the team together at the last minute.
Yeah, and I think that politicians will give the illusion of capitulation to workers, which will make, I think it's like a false sense of security, right? They'll be like, oh no, we totally understand, and as soon as we prevent a quote dictator, isn't that the thing the liberals say? Like, we need a quote democracy, not a dictator. As soon as we,
Yeah, right.
as soon as we can secure freedom and democracy for everyone, we'll totally take care of you guys. Promise. But then nothing will happen.
Yeah, just give me the club, and I will make sure that you're protected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's
we've
crazy.
seen how well that has worked historically, not just in the US, right?
Yeah. And then one last thing for me, and I'm sorry if you had anything else that you wanted to add as far as focuses from 2023, please go ahead, because I know I've been taking up a lot of the airtime.
No, it's all good. Just a conversation. So
For me,
there will be times where I'm ranting, believe me.
yeah, yeah, well, for sure. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? Everyone
Yeah.
gets their shot. For me, another thing that happened right towards the tail end of 2023. Now, this is going to go into more international law, so to speak, so we're branching just a hair outside the US, but I'll tie it all back together. Is the results of COP28, which, for people that may not be aware, COP28 was an international climate change conference that is put together by the United Nations and also co-opted by a lot of Middle Eastern countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, things like that. And it's supposed to be a productive, meaningful get-together of some of the world's most powerful nations to discuss what they're going to do to specifically focus on tackling the issue of climate change. Now, for some people, they're like, oh, what do you mean? Having more carbon in the atmosphere means we're going to have great crop yields, or whatever they're saying now. maybe I'm not talking to those people, maybe I am, but some of the big takeaways that I had from COP28 was that there was a proposal that was put together in which countries would have to create a fund, which could be, they've been tossed around ideas why that fund is held by the World Bank, etc., etc., that would pay out to victims of climate change, so to speak. And what they meant by that were countries that were so poor that they essentially had no shot. They're going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change no matter what we do right now. And there was going to be a fund that would actually go to support these citizens of these countries, these underdeveloped nations. Unsurprisingly, the US really isn't a big fan of the idea. More specifically, they wanted to axe the agreement, which was essentially the main focal point of the conference this past year, on the premise that the payments should be voluntary and that no country should be mandated to contribute. Now, we're talking about the wealthiest country in the world saying that they don't want to have to be held accountable or responsible for paying those things out. They eventually caved a little bit, and they've pledged $17.5 million to this global fund, which you and I both know is pennies.
Pocket change, yeah, exactly.
And the reason that they said that they shouldn't is that because they're a part of, now with the signing of the Paris Agreement and all that, they were already doing enough to contribute, so that way they shouldn't really be having to pay penance for these other countries in these other parts of the world. The only other thing that I find funny about that, last thing, is that this was at the end of last year, which was the record-setting year for private insurance firms in the United States having to pay out claims for environmental disasters and natural cause issues. Billions of dollars in insurance claims paid out, which a lot of insurance companies are either, one, no longer going to want to add to their policy options, or two, are going to back out of these places that are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. I just thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. So America gets to essentially help cause a problem and then doesn't have to help clean it up.
No. Obviously, how could we blame the U.S. when China and India are doing all the polluting? Don't you know? It's all them. It's just those two countries. They're the only ones that contribute.
I have heard you, and I'm going to say rant, no disrespect. I've heard you rant several times about that talking point and why that just peeves the shit out of you.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, let's not even go to the deeper-seated rage-inducing part of it. You're comparing China, who is essentially still on the tail end of its second industrial revolution, with the highest population in the world, over double the US's population, over triple. And we're holding them to the same standard as the United States. The United States is, make no mistake about it, number one, the most developed country, well, depending on how you want to phrase it, in terms of infrastructure and technology, the most developed country in the world. And the fact that they are allowed to continuously scapegoat a country that is now developing, same with India. India is going through what a lot of economists are referring to as a second industrial revolution right now. With 2 billion people in them. Yeah, they're going to have more CO2 emissions than you, but part of the reason it makes me so mad is that for decades, we were the ones that offloaded all of our plastics and all of our garbage and sent them on cargo ships over to these countries to then use it as an excuse to criticize those countries for all the pollution that they were putting into the waters. Okay, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I'm sorry, but if this is the US and we're doing US exceptionalism, which is what every great God-given patriot wants to do, I don't care what China does. I don't care what India does. I do to an extent, but can we just focus on the fact that we are supposed to be leading the charge, and frankly, we're not?
So, what would you have them do? I know I asked that
Well,
before, but like, what's your idea of a solution? Like, I think I've heard you mention other countries that had some pretty cool green solutions.
yeah, well, I mean, it's different, right? You have to take everything with an asterisk. I'm not expecting the U.S. to just become this.
Paragon of virtue overnight, of course.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be some solar punk utopia where everything's windmills and solar panels, etc., etc. But there needs to be, I mean, specifically when it comes around the discourse, because right now this country can't even agree on whether or not climate change is real. So at first I'd like to see that addressed in some more meaningful way. I don't know how, but I mean, God forbid we finally agree on things that are just objectively true about the planet. No other countries seem to be having this much of a problem around this, especially that China demon that we keep bringing up. They seem pretty gung-ho about fixing their infrastructure.
No, brother, you
Um,
forget. All right, I have a question. How much tax does it take to fix the environment? Why should I have to pay carbon tax?
Yeah, exactly. Why should you? Why should you individually have to sacrifice a little bit of your paycheck and your overall earnings annually to help maintain a habitable planet? Because Elon's getting us to Mars, so I mean, what's this all for anyway?
That's true.
My
And then
my favorite part
we're
about
gonna
that
be
though is
robots.
yeah, simultaneously the reason I shouldn't care about climate change is because one, it's not real, but also two, we're going to Mars instead, but also three, it's better for crop yields. So three different reasons that, in my opinion, kind of all contradict or at least work against each other rather than work with each other. Um, but yeah, as far as tangible solutions go, I'm sorry, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a financier. I can't break down the specifics. But where is the goddamn sense of urgency? And I'm sure people will want to tell me, here's all the things that we've done. Here's all the things that we're doing. Yes, we are, but it doesn't feel like it's a primary objective. This should be one of the primary objectives of humanity, let alone the United States of America. We're talking about future-proofing our species. Forget Mars. Mars. Go live in Death Valley if you want to live on Mars. Okay? If you think it's so goddamn good. And we can't even make that habitable, yet you're going to convince me that we can go to another planet and terraform it? Get the out of my face. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this discourse. I don't want my entire life to be hinged on Elon Musk's narcissism getting me off planet Earth. Planet Earth is, by and large, one of the most beautiful things. It's a fucking organic spaceship flying through the cosmos, with teeming with millions of forms of life, and we're obsessed with whether or not it's round or that it's worth saving.
Oh yeah, dude, I totally forgot that there are flat earthers out there.
I mean, I can't. And again, like I said, I don't have a lot of specifics on what I want to see differently, rather, in terms of like raw legislation. But everything that's being done needs to be turned up to 11. I mean,
No, that's fair.
Biden has at least pledged to try to keep some of these things going, but right before he takes over, or right as he takes over, you get things like Virginia versus EPA, which, yeah, we could say whatever we want about government oversight on things and whether or not that's better or worse than private sector, at least the American government. But Jesus Christ, we're basically saying, leave us alone, don't tell me about the environment. And if we
So
can't have corporations be liable for changing infrastructure, then who the hell is going to change it?
so Virginia versus EPA for people in the audience that might not know, that's basically where they dismantled the EPA, right? Or am I thinking of something else?
They heavily neutered it. So an oversimplification of that ruling is that the EPA needs to be drastically peeled back in its scope and its direct involvement in all these different things. The EPA, it was one of the only government bodies that I'm aware of that, for better or for worse, was very intent on sticking to its mission statement and being very strict on environmental policies, having lofty goals, and keeping people accountable for how far off those goals they were. This decision, West Virginia versus EPA, just cut all progress and power they had at the knees. I mean, it's a landmark victory for all these giant corporatists and all these people that just love capitalism and think capitalism is the greatest thing ever conceived. But here we are, and now we've made tangible regression in some regards. Now you have scientists talking about the Atlantic Ocean is turning up to a heat that's almost unsustainable for its ecosystem. So, yeah, why not? Let's just all go Mad Max and have a great time.
Oh man, yeah, it's a shame, and to kind of pivot into the next takeaway that I had based on what you were saying. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
No, that's it. I'm sure I'll have some more refined messaging in future conversations, but right now it just sort of like I said, this is kind of like a guttural guttural reaction kind of stuff.
Knee jerk, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think you nailed something on the head. You said like there's like a regression happening in things that we should be caring about, and I'm noticing like we're backsliding socially in a lot of ways too. Like one of the big takeaways for me, and this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, is the Black American quality of life has continued to decline. Um, like I think it was really interesting in 2023 because we got to see kind of a top-down view of how much benign neglect or even reactionary, dare I say, anti-blackness still exists or is actively in effect within institutions or even legislators. Um, some of the examples being like affirmative action being repealed, which there's this guy. Are you familiar with Edward Bloom? You know who that is?
I've heard the name, but I'd be lying if I said I was familiar.
So he's essentially this guy that's been on this crusade to undo or upend affirmative action for like the last 30 years. And he's tried every which way to do it. And he basically finally was able to use Asian immigrants as a shield to convince the higher courts that affirmative action is discriminatory. It's not righting wrongs. It's not closing disproportionate gaps. It's not providing people resources that normally wouldn't have it. And one of the biggest problems I think that like, other than it just being in my mind, him being a white supremacist, outside of that, what it actually did is it moved the focus from legacy admissions, which is the real problem. If you want to get more people into higher education, the problem's legacy admissions. It moved that spotlight away from that, and it focused it on this other thing. So I feel like it worsened race relations with everybody, and it was just like a huge victory for a lot of far right conservatives. So I feel like it's going to set black people, some Asian Americans, and like white women even back considerably in the future. So that's concerning. I saw a UCLA study that came out at the end of last year that showed that between January 1st of 2021 and December 31st of 2022, federal, state, and local government officials introduced 563 anti-CRT measures, half of which were actually implemented or adopted, which is insane. We can't even, like you said, we can't even get like people to vote on things that are, and pass things that are meaningful outside of like 27 bills. But we've got people hand over fist in local government or stateside passing all of these things, working in tandem together to do it. A lot of that was like Republicans, Democrats, obviously. If I feel like their job is to basically lose, I feel like they like to point the finger at Republicans and say they're bad, but we understand, so we're gonna wear a kente cloth and stick our fists in the air. So I feel like that was a huge thing for a huge L for the black community, a huge L for America. There's hate crimes on the uptick, and there was a poll that talked about quality of life for all Americans. Hispanics and blacks disproportionately reported that they're concerned about the quality of their drinking water and pollutants getting into their living environments. So this also goes back to what we talked about corporations that are just not being held accountable, and climate change. Like
Yeah.
these are just things that are just not being addressed.
Yeah, well, and not to mention you have Twitter under new management or under its current management with huge upticks in racial slurs, homophobic slurs, things like that. You have, I mean, I could go spend 3 minutes on Twitter and I could find 10 posts that are basically either eugenics or white supremacy or both.
Insane.
It's insane to me. It takes no effort at all. It's becoming, I would argue, the status quo or the new norm for Twitter. And you could say whatever you want. Twitter reflects the thoughts of society in that moment. So if I can go onto the world's most dominating social media platform, and I can see that even 25% of the people that are on there, of the millions of people that are on there, are constantly, day after day after day, espousing blatantly racist sentiments, I think that tells you more than enough about the state of society and the state of this country in terms of the regression that you've seen in those topics. Now, whether or not it's people being more vocal about it versus people feeling it more, that could be a separate discussion that you could argue. I would argue that people are actually making a regression in how they feel about racial topics, not just expressing them more confidently. I think it's both. But separately from that, it's going back to what you were saying about the detriment that it's going to cause. It's shocking to me, the social engineering that's being done around DEI and the affirmative action conversation, and I think maybe potentially the most blatantly downside or negative aspect of it is pitting other minority groups against each other. Because now you're going to have this issue where if Asian Americans are constantly used, like you said, as a shield to end something that was sort of put in place to disproportionately impact Black people in America to help them get into better educational facilities and institutions, now you run the risk of having those two groups mad at each other.
Yeah, and
this is...
Just to be clear,
Yeah.
it was Asian immigrants.
Excuse me.
There was actually a lot of support for affirmative action by Asian Americans. But that's something that's like I guess a more nuanced top take, is that like a lot of Asian Americans apparently are discriminated against by Asian immigrants, which is
interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I definitely misspoke there.
No, I just wanted, for the audience sake, I didn't want to seem like we're seeding, like racial tensions or whatever. Like that's not the intent of the conversation.
Yeah, but no, it just seems so clear to me. I mean, it's been kind of the U.S.'s bread and butter. Not really sure when you could pinpoint a hard pivot to this being the dominant form of politics in America, but identity politics and the culture war is, from my perspective, the primary focus of our political leaders. I can't find a single thing that they seem to all care about unilaterally other than stoking these flames. And whether that's private sector or government, all sides seem happier when they have people just angry at each other and angry at themselves.
I think the last year or two of Obama kind of opened the door. I noticed he was getting a lot of criticism from like Fox, and then I know this sounds weird, but like what really kind of opened my eyes to like the culture war, and then how it kind of trickled off, it splintered into like all these different subcutaneous arguments that all ended in a pipeline, right? And it drags people in a particular direction, and they all kind of start espousing similar beliefs or similar talking points. And that was Gamergate. That Gamergate era was wild, man. Like, I wouldn't even just blame it. It's not like a gamer thing, but it was like there were these. This is just my personal opinion because I watched someone that was very close to me get radicalized in this way. It was like Gamergate YouTube essayists who were in the gaming space were just like going ham on feminism, going ham on like immigration, going ham on black people going ham on like white liberals, just absolutely unhinged content. And I feel like I don't know if it made people fearful. I don't know if it was just straight misinformation. I don't know really what happened, but I started noticing this huge pivot. Maybe there was a different time for you, but like that 2013 to 2016 era, like right before Gamergate and then like during, like right after into like Trump's presidency was like this weird, like almost like a curve, this uptick. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to be like a good way to phrase it, because I do agree with you. I mean, I think if you were to ask me where I thought the starting point was, it would probably be not too long after Trump took office the first time, or Trump took office, I should say. But it was really more about the Gamergate was kind of like lighting the match, and then 2016 on was just feeding fuel into that fire. It was like the door had then been just cracked a little bit, and then we just, as a society, have knocked it down and swarmed, for lack of a better metaphor. But anyway, yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing to me. I mean, certain things, certain belief systems, and certain latent, racist ideals have always been there. I mean, it's not not like there was ever an era in which we weren't espousing things like this, but there is an undeniable exponential difference between now and, let's say, 10 years ago, in my mind, and that's from kind of an outside perspective of just witnessing what people are more comfortable talking about when people are saying, and now it's become the thing. Like, it seems to me like it's almost the cool thing now. You have entire communities dedicated to xenophobia, racism, white supremacy, misogyny. We have terms for them. We have entire podcasts that have built million-dollar empires based on subjugation and hatred of other people, based on immutable characteristics that they cannot control. And to me, you can't be in a position in which that statement is true and claim to be of any sort of heightened sense of a society or civilization.
But I think they would argue that some civilizations are just superior to others. Some societies just work better.
Yeah,
right?
Of course, yeah. Ignoring the reasons why a lot of their nice things were put together, or why everything felt and was great, is because you had a bunch of non-white male bodies piling up behind curtains, out of sight, out of mind. But it's just me.
So yeah, unfortunately, I guess all with the quality of life, I know I'm trying to keep this super condensed. There will be times in the future where I go more in depth, but just for the sake of the first episode, I want to keep it like as palatable as possible for people. So I'm intentionally kind of holding back the first episode. But yeah, it's saddening to see the culture war really start having really visual negative effects on everybody. Even the people that are espousing the things, they're not happy people. So,
Yeah.
and I
I mean,
mean, I read a study that was like, I think like 2 weeks ago, maybe three, that said like 30% of Black Americans that were polled said that they are in active fear of their life when they leave their house. Like, that's not for no reason.
greatest country in the world.
So, say again?
I said, yep, greatest country in the world.
Yeah.
Things are great when 30% of your population, or 30% of a population, just solely based on the color of their skin, doesn't feel safe ever. That's all good indicators of health there.
Yeah. But I guess, like we've said a lot of negative, there was a positive takeaway I had.
Yeah, we should probably pivot. I'm sure people by now are like thinking that we're doomers and ready to burn everything down.
We're not doomers, but we do have to, address things for what they are, or the trajectory that it's going. I think that's one of the things that will make our show unique, is that we're not just going to tell people what they want to hear. We're going to tell people what it is. And I would like, in the hopefully in the future we'll have some solutions for people too. But I think one of the most powerful takeaways, although it might seem small, is that there was a report released that showed there is a major downshift in alcohol consumption in young adults. Um, I'm not an anti-alcohol person, but I think it's a really big net positive. It was like a 3 or 4 year analysis of drinking habits that showed that younger Americans are drinking less than previous generations that were that same age. They're not exactly sure as to why that's happening, but they believe it's linked to, in part, to like the legalization of marijuana. Like you and I live in a pretty progressive area, so there's decriminalization of marijuana, which is, I think a good thing. It's just objectively less harmful than consumption of alcohol. I've heard you have this conversation with someone else, so I think that's a great thing. The substance seems to be like most popular amongst like Zoomers and millennials, but it's like weed has all these different applications. Like some people use it for anxiety, some people use it for like sleep, some people use it for, you know, uh, creams. Like there are all these different derivatives, and it's not just like people polluting their lungs with smoke. So I think overall, considering how incredibly terrible alcohol can be, especially when abused, I just think that this was like a big win for once. So
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot of interesting things about the generations as they come up that I think are worth noting. I mean, we kind of had one of the first big things of like my generation, for example, was that barely anybody was smoking or consuming, cigarettes. Now, granted, it got a new face and kind of pivoted a little bit, but even with the advent of vaping and whatnot, there is still drastically lower numbers of consumption of any sort of nicotine or tobacco-based product in younger people. So to see that that's continuing and becoming more pervasive, and we as we get older, or as we get younger, I guess would be a better way to say it, are learning the long-term negative ramifications and understanding and acknowledging that these aren't worth it. And I think that's a great indicator. Now the last domino to fall will be also bringing that into lifestyle changes, dietary changes. We've got some other big wins to have in our resume coming up in the next 5 or 10 years that I certainly hope we get. But progress is progress, and I think it's great. I think we're gonna see, it'd be interesting to see if there was any reports on, or if there's going to be any reports on any sort of downticks in like domestic violence issues or things like that, because it's well documented that consumption of alcohol, the more prevalent it is in a society, the more domestic disputes and domestic violence occurs. So I am all for it.
if that study's not done, I can guarantee someone's working on it right now.
Yeah, I
Um,
imagine so. Yeah.
but yeah, I
Yeah.
don't. It gave me hope for the future, kind of, especially considering we front loaded a lot of negativity in this conversation, right? Because there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world, especially like in our country, um, like across all these different uh, like groups of people that are all trying to figure it out. So the fact that there's so much stress on Americans, and there's especially young Americans, and you know people your age and my age and even younger are not drinking. That's, I don't know. That just gives me some hope. So
Yeah, and all the things that I say about the issues that are being addressed with climate change aren't enough, and we're not doing enough at the U.S. level, at the global level to focus. There are plenty of people that are paying attention. There's a lot of good things that are being worked on, and there are people that are putting in a lot of effort. Sure, for me, it's never enough, just because I believe so much in the severity of the issue, but there's still a lot of positive things moving in that direction. I mean, we're finally getting to the point where, for various reasons, the Amazon is starting to actually be protected now. You have countries
based.
like, yeah, I mean, thank goodness. They call them the lungs of the earth for a reason. It's by far, that combined with the smaller organisms and the plant life in our oceans, it is the biggest supplier of oxygen to our planet, and the fact that we let it burn for whatever consumerist developmental means for so long is beyond me. But you have countries like Ecuador, which, yes, they are a smaller country, so it'd be nice to see some solidarity, but all it takes is one to start. And a lot of their voters in Ecuador, I think it was like 60%, voted to cease all oil exploration in their national park,
Oh wow.
which is directly attached to the Amazon. So you have a huge win for climate change there.
I know this is gonna sound kind of hippy dippy, but I also think the artificial meats are gonna be like a huge contributor to preservation of the rainforest as well.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I mean, there's a lot of things that are like loaded up and being worked on. I'm definitely hoping that we continue to move forward. I mean, you have the first successful achieved ignition for fusion-based energy. That's a huge story. So I definitely want people to understand that it's not all doom and gloom. There are things to look forward to. We just have to have a sense of urgency in caring about these things and continuing to protect that progress and push it forward. But we do have a lot of things that are moving up. Socially, I think we're regressing a little bit, so I'd like to see some, in 2024, I'd like to see some things kind of, change direction there. But in terms of the climate, as much as we could talk about how bad it all looks, there's a lot of people that are putting in a lot of work. Little known thing for me, I think that the fact that globally there's been a lot of trials done on the 4-day work week, I think that is a huge win too. It's going to be subtle for a lot of people until it's of their normal life. I think having 3 days off a week is going to make a huge difference for the average person. They did trials in the US, in the UK, Microsoft being one of the primary pushers of that US-based study, and found nothing but positive results. I mean, I'm sure if I looked into the nitty-gritty, there was maybe a few negatives here and there, but the people who did the various studies all came back reporting, quote, huge benefits.
What's wild is like we're one of the last countries to figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, we're still struggling to figure out a lot of things, which are, bigger, broader topics, sort of the big elephants that are always in the room, it seems. But yeah, no, it's crazy. It's like us in Japan, we just don't want to stop working. Which is the whole working till you die, sometimes literally, seems to be an obsession of ours. And it doesn't create healthy societies. It creates short-term gain, long-term, negative impact. It's so tried and true, and even if you're not seeing it, you're feeling it. I feel like the average American family is way less powerful now than it used to be. And the thing that's so ironic about it is that this is, simultaneously them pushing the pedal to the metal to get us all to work as much as we possibly can. And then you have half the political spectrum saying that what's most important and what's going to heal our societies is having the 2-parent household and the kid and having all this time to raise them and take care of them, yet both parents are working 70 hours a week to pay rent and put food on the table.
True.
So we're not willing to address it from a labor perspective. We're only willing to address it from a willingness and a culture perspective, going back to culture war being the number one priority.
Dude, it's so crazy when I hear older generations talk down to us and say stuff like, you guys are just lazy. Like in my day, I was able to like take care of my entire family. It's like, all right, well, you old that's not the way the world works. It's not the way the economy's structured. Like that's not the way the CPI is even like how it's structured anymore. It doesn't function in such a way where like 40 hours a week you can provide for a wife and 2 children and have a dog and the house with a white picket fence. It's like impossible.
Yeah, I mean, and I understand, like, to some degree, you have too many fucking people in the country, not everyone's going to have a house with a white picket fence, but if you're not going to have those things, then they should at least be affordable. The fact that a 2-bedroom apartment in a lot of parts of the country cost more than my parents' mortgage payments for a 5-bedroom house was.
Yeah.
This should never, ever be the case. the fact that I can't remember what absurd number it was, but I was listening to Kyle Kalinske. I don't know if you know who that is,
Yeah,
but
I do.
he's another political content creator.
Secular talk.
Yeah, secular talk, exactly. And he said that there was information that was released recently. I think this was back last year, towards like mid last year, that 73% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
73%.
Yeah,
and we're talking about healing the family and doing the classic nuclear family thing and having all this great healthy lifestyle. No one's even home, and when they do get home, they're shoving fast food in their mouths and passing out in front of Netflix because that's all the time they have.
True, and don't forget that people can't, on average, they don't even have $400 in their checking or savings account in case of an emergency. Like the majority of Americans will have to go into debt, like use a credit card or take out a loan to pay for like fucking spare tires or like some sort of other unforeseen consequence.
Yeah, and if we have a more in-depth conversation about this, which I hope we do,
I'm sure we will.
I'm gonna bring a lot more ammunition because, I'm one of those people that I think is becoming a more frequent or more normal sentiment that it's by design. This isn't like an accidental happenstance. that individual freedoms and individual comfort have just been eroding over the last 2 decades or more. But again, we can touch on all that with more specifics, but it just seems to me, I'm just tired of hearing the same arguments from people that will actively prevent me from getting there. Because
True.
We can't approach the world the same way we did back in 1955. It's not the same world. It's not the same economy. Things have to change.
Yeah, but they'll tell you it's because the values are what changed. It's nothing else, it's just the values.
It's because liberals hate kids or something like that.
Oh man, that's a whole different. That could be its own episode. Liberals and children and whatever else. Oh my god. Yeah. So, but we're gonna keep it fast and loose for the first few episodes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have to throw in my little
jabs
quips here and there.
Of course,
I gotta throw my jabs when I have a chance.
Of course. So since we've kind of naturally just shifted into more positive conversations, I want to kind of keep that going if we can, or at least kind of keep it neutral. So I don't know, do you have any like major hopes or like predictions for this year? Unless you still had stuff from last year.
No, not really. I mean, I have a lot of things that I want to be addressed. I don't even know that some of them are necessarily like hopeful, overwhelmingly positive things as they are preventing more negative things. So I guess from one perspective, you could say that's one and the same, or you could say that it's slightly different. But I mean, for me, my big things are I like to make sure that societies are healthier, communities are healthier, and that the planet is healthier. Those are kind of the main things that I focus on. Everyone has different ideas on how one manifests those things. And a lot of my changes that I hope for are probably not going to become as a direct result of something, tangible that a government does or legislative body does. But I just want to see people start to understand that this pitting against each other, this thing that's happening on a day-to-day basis, it's exactly what benefits the very people that you think are ruining your life. But to go, sort of tangential to that, I just really want to see more emphasis on climate protections, the fact that we've started in the Amazon. Please keep going. Fully realize that to the best of your ability. I would love to see different projects come out where, things like solar and wind energy become more and more prevalent. I know the United States, despite all my harping on them, is making a concerted effort to transition their infrastructure for energy. Despite lots of opposition and lots of logistics, I know it's not as simple as flipping off a light switch, but I want to see land be protected. I want to see effort. I want to see dissemination of information to even the individual level as to how one can contribute in a meaningful way. Because right now they tell you all these things. You know, there was the carbon footprint and things like that. But I feel like it didn't really give people involvement. It didn't make people feel like they were a part of the solution. And I think it starts on community levels. So I really, myself included, starting with me, if no one else, I really want, you know, you have to start small and then scale out. I want to see a lot more people focused on reforming their communities to be more friendly, more collaborative. And when I mean collaborative, I mean actually working together to solve problems in your city. Please be more involved in local representation, local government. And the more that becomes the norm, the bigger and bigger it gets. But you have to start somewhere. So I'm not going to try to give these big action points to Congress or governments or anything like that, at least not at this moment in time. I kind of want the call to action to be at the individual. And, you know, it starts simple, but I really hope that we start to understand that a lot of this political flag waving and, and a lot of these sort of distractive measures are exactly what is intended. And I really want us to move forward in a more positive and collaborative direction that actually reforms a lot of what's going on around us.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it actually starts with stuff like this, these conversations. Like you and I don't agree on every single thing. We don't have to, but we, like you said, we want similar outcomes. And I think it will take people like you and I leading by example as well. So you and I have previously discussed we have plans for some community work. We're not going to release them right now. We're not going to talk about those things because it'll be a surprise later down the road. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely based. Because I mean,
Yeah.
if your community's trashed, if your community's or if you have outside influences that are sabotaging it, what do you really have?
Yeah, well, and you know, for me, it's if you're able to fortify, because I mean, this is what humanity was built on. I mean, you can talk about the history of exploitation at scale, et cetera, but what it was, we're a collaborative species. That's what we do. That's what humans are the best at. Putting minds and bodies together to figure out how to solve the issues in front of us. Now, we no longer have to solve, or at least a lot of us, especially in more developed nations, we're not worried about the tiger coming to kill us in camp. We're not trying to figure out how to tame the wolves. But we are trying to figure out how to reclaim a life that feels like the one we all desire. Because I think if you ask the average person, it doesn't feel right for one reason or another. Now, some of those reasons are going to be hard to reconcile for me. You know, if you think everything in life is awful because black people are getting too close to power, then that's a separate conversation, and I'm not sure that we can reconcile those differences. But outside of the obvious exceptions, I think everyone can tell that we're moving further and further away from autonomy. We're moving further and further away from community. This rugged, anxious individualism is the way I would describe it, especially with the younger generations. There has to be a reversion. I mean, I really think there has to be a reversion. You have too many people, too many skyrocketing numbers of depression, anxiety, social issues, inability to interact within one another, especially when it comes to conflict. I mean, how can you have conflict resolution without the conflict piece? You can't. And there's too many things piling up for us to continue to be too afraid to interact with one another. We've got to make a change, a paradigm shift, if you will.
And my tinfoil hat self would say that some of those things are also by design. But
Absolutely.
just for the sake of clarity in the audience, when you talked about black people getting too close to power, obviously that's satire. That's not something that you like. You know, you're like, oh, I'm worried about this. But there are,
no.
yeah. But there are people
I'm
that.
saying, yeah.
Go ahead.
If that's your primary concern, if that's what you think is what's happening, and that's why you think the country has gone to shit, so to speak, then you and I are going to have a completely different conversation than I'm having right now.
Yeah, and at some point, I would like to be able to discuss any litany of these topics with our community as we build them. So I think that will also allow us kind of a peek into people's minds and see what their values are and what they actually care about, and like, I guess, kind of at their core, what makes them tick.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah,
How about for you?
well, I mean, that was really kind of inspiring. So that was really positive. I guess my predictions for this year are a little bit more like, or my hopes are a little more wacky. Um, I don't foresee a lot of the stuff coming to fruition, to be honest with you, but I'd still like to see certain things like kind of bridging off of what you said about black people in power. I would love to see black people like unanimously vote third party. Like I'm so sick of Democrats and I'm so sick of Republicans. I would love to just see black people vote third party.
You're gonna
I
strike a nerve there. I
I'm
can tell you that
sure
already.
I'm sure I will. The Black Congressional Caucus, useless. A bunch of old gatekeeping corporatists, as far as I'm concerned, don't care about black people. Republicans don't care about black people. Um, Democrats don't care about black people. So I would say for the average like black voter and even poor white voter, because like a lot of poor white people and black people still share spaces, like living spaces, especially in like cities. I would say look into third party. I'm going to be a huge proponent of ranked choice voting on this platform, on this broadcast. Um, I think that if you can't, like, don't fall victim to personality cults. Don't fall victim to just talking points. Actually look at policy and legislation. If you don't know how to do that, here in the future, on this channel, we'll have resources for you and we will help um, bring that information to you. Um, so I think that's really important for people. Uh, Obviously, you'll hear people say like, "Oh, you're promoting spoilers," or "Oh, like if we don't save the democracy, it's going to end up in a dictatorship." But I think that like even if that's true, even if like it's a protest vote and it basically were to forfeit something like the election to Trump and people are afraid of that, if poor people and black people can survive Richard Nixon, I think that we as we as Americans can survive any fucking thing, to be honest with you.
That's a good point. Yeah, and just to be clear, you don't really have a functioning democracy if it's a coerced decision. If I only get to vote for one or the other, even if neither of them represent my views or represent my needs, then how would you really describe that as a healthy democratic process? That's something I've always had a hard time wrapping my head around, is this obsession with the two-party system, how neither of them represent progression in any sort of meaningful way. Um, besides some obvious examples. But that's the thing, is they get away, like the Republicans, at the very least of the two parties, are a little bit more forthright with their beliefs, however frightening they are.
Yeah.
Um, and then Democrats are sort of more of like the knife tucked behind their back sort of thing, waiting to betray you or stab you. I mean, we're talking about specific examples, not necessarily, but just in general, they say one thing, mean the other.
It's Malcolm X. Malcolm X, I think, said it best when he said the wolf and the fox.
Yeah, I mean, we have two sides of the same coin,
Exactly.
but their means or their hopes, their aims are the same. Democrats have just been using minority voters as a shield to get votes, because if it wasn't for them, they would lose every election in a landslide,
And
because they never bring anything substantive to the table.
exactly, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, Republicans are using poor white people as shields. You're getting people
Yep.
that need health care, who need real like actual like workers' rights, who need like all these different things like childcare, and they're basically tricking these people or galvanizing these people in a direction and getting them to vote against their best interests. Absolutely insane. So
Yep.
they're absolutely
So
two sides of the same coin.
yeah, so essentially, American democracy and American politics is weaponized fear.
Yeah,
Is what we're
absolutely.
getting at. Yeah. Vote for me or everything falls apart. Vote for me or they'll have you killed. Vote for me or they'll take everything about who you are away from you, even though nothing of the sort has ever really been true or is going to be true.
Or if it is true, it's because we allowed it.
Yeah,
And we
exactly.
always plan to do it regardless of whatever you did.
It's because you voted third party. That's why fascism reigns.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it's going to be a fun election year because you're going to see all these sentiments flare up. I mean, I already see it now. I go into certain communities that I guess you would say tend to be more left leaning, more democratic leaning. Not necessarily these like vote blue no matter who people, which I mean, please. I'd rather talk to almost anybody else on the planet about political discourse.
Yeah.
But they penetrate these communities, and it didn't start until about a couple months ago. In these communities that I'm in now, you see these people that are. It's an election year, so everything that we say in between elections is fine. But when it comes to election year, you really need to get realistic and understand that you're voting either this way or you're voting for a dictatorship. You're voting for terrorism. You're voting for domestic violence and racism and this and that. And it's like, okay, well, again, weaponized fear. If that's the only way that I can express my democracy, then my democracy is broken. So I think it's up to people, especially the marginalized and the oppressed, that if they're going to be given access to these systems, they need to use it for what actually is meaningful to them. And if they aren't allowed to do that, then you're telling these people they don't have a voice, they don't have an opinion, and they're not a part of the process.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole point of places like, or like institutions like Democrats, is to keep people in a state that's perpetually negative, but not so negative that spurs them to action. They're almost like it's like they're able to pacify these groups to in some regard. Same thing could be said on the opposite end of the spectrum. And you said something really important, and it's something that's always kind of grinded my gears, is that notion of like you need to be realistic. I watched an interview on Secular Talk, and that was like a point of contention that they had with what's her name, Breonna Taylor Joy, or Joy Taylor. You know who I'm talking about? The chick from The
Yeah.
Hill. So they were. It was him and Crystal Ball. Funny enough, that's her name. And they were debate. He was debating this gal, and they were basically saying like, third party is irrelevant, and you need to be realistic about expectations. So it's not about what you want. It's not about policy. It's about what's actually realistically able to be drafted or passed or can make it on a committee's desk. But like you already said in the very fucking beginning of this conversation, there's only 27 things that got passed last year. So
Yeah, right.
so it doesn't really actually matter. And I hear people like Destiny constantly verbally just tear people down about being naive or being stupid or not just voting blue because it's very clear like there's one side is just not as bad as the other, and if you're not doing this or voting for this lesser evil, then I have to question your intelligence. Shit like that is, I think, super fucking reductive, super fucking harmful, and I just think that that's also like one of the the problems. Like those narratives only, in my opinion, are applicable if you're having open discourse and creating bipartisanship, like working across the aisle. But as we see, these people are doing none of it. They're not passing any meaningful legislation outside of the stuff for the military, which I agree, that's great. But like outside of that, we still have workers that are dying. We have people that don't have health care, yada yada yada. The we have earth problems, right? Just to be like smooth brained about it. And it's just really disheartening and frustrating to hear people browbeat you about some shit that's not even accurate.
Yeah. And to clarify for the audience, I did look it up just so I didn't want any miscommunications or misunderstanding. Her name is Brianna Joy Gray. That is the
Oh, I
person.
don't know where I got Taylor from.
I
It's
think
been a long day
we blended her name with
with
Aunt
Breonna
Taylor's
Taylor. Oh,
name. So,
oh
yeah, so
no.
that's why I wanted to look it up and clarify, just to make sure we weren't throwing way too much mud in the water there.
Yeah, thank you.
Um,
It's been a long day
but
for both of us, so.
yeah, definitely. But no, it's I mean you're absolutely right. I can't continue to stomach political discourse if what all it means is team mentality. It's tribalism. It really is. And if you're telling me that in 2024 human beings are circling back around to the verbal form of I go on one side, you go on the other, and then eventually we'll charge into the middle, if that's the best that we've come up with, then what the was the point of all of these 200 years of experimentation with political ideas, political progress, what is the fucking point? What is the fucking point if we're actually going backwards? I mean, the people who founded the country told us that they didn't want a strong two-party representation or only two-party representation for exactly these reasons. We're supposed to be human, addressing human issues. You cannot put people in a box of one or the other. There's 400 million people in this country, and you cannot possibly say that you are all-encompassing of one train of thought or one school of thought or the other. The fact that we are so obsessed with that, and we will actively try to coerce each other into those boxes that we put ourselves in, it's lunacy. It's lunacy, and to me, it's political suicide. It's social suicide. It's you condemning yourself and everyone around you to never getting anything done. They keep telling us over, oh, if we just finally put this person in office, if we just finally do the right thing and vote for the good people, if we vote for the good guys, everything will be fixed. Well, guess what, motherfuckers? They only ever get 4 years at a time, 8 years if they're lucky, and nothing ever meaningfully changes. And if it does, then the 4 years after that, it goes back, the pendulum goes back and forth. And you know what? We're at the bottom of the pendulum, getting cut by the blade slowly every single year. When are you going to be tired of getting slowly bled to death by the political structure that you're convinced is the only way we can do this? I'm not convinced, and therefore I want to do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there are people that resonate with that in the audience. I'm also sure there's people in the audience that would be like, y'all sound like a bunch of liberals.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, you're trying to drag people into one side of
Exactly.
political thought, so congratulations, you're proving my point.
You failed.
But the fact that you're doing it, I want to hear from those people anyway, because we gotta have the conversations.
Yeah, that's very true. So, but with the intent that the conversation produces something. So
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, I love talking. You know me. I can get spun up and I can go on rants, as you've alluded to before. But
I do the same thing, man.
Yeah, I'd rather that they be meaningful and actually, put forward something, change somebody's mind or give somebody something to think about that they didn't before, and that's progress in any little way, shape, or form.
And to humanize this, I guess, a lot of, I think, the disagreements and the frustrations and the vehement, I'm going to call it gang violence or gang politics, where people are just siding with one side or the other. I think it's because people, although they've been conditioned to not critically think, which is a separate conversation, people do care. People care a lot. And because they care, they're desperate for solutions, and they're desperate for people to make them feel safe. So people put their flags in these camps, these intellectual camps. And unfortunately, they fall prey to, like I'd mentioned earlier, like cults of personality. So
yeah, my goal for humanity, especially within the U.S., please reinforce yourself against the insistence upon putting your mind into a box, your mind, your soul, your beliefs, your desires into one or the other, because there's no way any human being could be all encompassed that way. And we need to reform politics around that ideology, in my opinion. That's what I want to see.
Super based. Yeah, I mean, this has been great. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I mean, like I said, first time we're doing it, just taking conversations and bits and pieces of it that we've had before, putting it into a digital forum. It's been fun.
Yeah. So I had some other stuff, but I'll just because I kind of want to end it on like a funny note. Do you have any like wacky predictions or anything that would be funny? Wouldn't it be funny to see this in 2024 before we close out?
Honestly, my 2024 predictions were pretty intense, so I don't know if any of my 2024 predictions are going to be super lighthearted to end.
That's okay. I mean, it could be like dark humor. Like it would be really zany if this happened, like in a sad, scary way or whatever. I don't know.
I don't know, man. I just want to see. So, sometimes when it comes to the news cycle, having it broken up by something just absolutely wild and irreverent just really helps break up the severity of life. Adds a little bit of levity to the situation. So, when it was COVID, we had the Tiger King. So I think in 2024, the world's definitely going to need somebody or something to help cut that tension, because we're all gonna have high blood pressure by the end of this year. So I hope to God that something manifests itself. I don't know what it is, but I'm hoping for it. That's for sure.
Awesome. So escapism.
Exactly. Yes. That's what's gonna move us all forward.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Um, I think to kind of hone in on something goofy, which I've already told you about before, I think it would be hilarious if Donald Trump sponsored Tim Scott to be his vice president.
Oh my God, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. I actually, in a sort of a sick, like you mentioned, dark sense of humor. I'm glad you brought that up, because his VP selection is one of the things that I am most anxious about in a more like humorous way, because I can't imagine it's anything remotely serious.
well,
Maybe
someone,
that's just naivety, but
I can't remember who it was, but there was a journalist that had mentioned Trump said in passing he wanted a female VP, but I don't buy it. And here's why. Like I think it would like logistically or strategically, it would be a huge layup for him to choose Tim Scott, right? Because Tim Scott, although he's not, I don't think he's a good representation of like the black community in America. He has acknowledged systemic issues. He came from like a poverty-based background, right? Um, he was the one of the only senators that put forth a police like a justice reform bill after George Floyd, which Democrats shot down. So that lends credence to like Trump is a progressive mind and he's being misframed. And I think it like makes Democrats look bad because they immediately after shooting down that bill, they gave police a crap ton of funding, like more than ever in history. Um, and I don't know. I think it would like kind of flip the discourse on its head. Obviously, Tim Scott has zero zero charisma. The guy is just a blank slate. Um, and so I think that would also help Trump because he's terrified that someone is going to steal the show from him. That's why like he never gave Vivek the microphone because Vivek just doesn't shut the up, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
I don't know. It would be funny to me, in a nihilistic kind of way, I guess. So
I mean, hell, while we're at it, what I want to see. I mean, no, I made a really outlandish joke that Alex Jones should be the press secretary for Trump's presidency. Um, but maybe we don't go as extreme there. Uh, it would be hilarious because there was like a tiny little seed that I mentioned to you a couple days ago that was planted of Alex Jones ending up in a feud with, Elon Musk over Twitter, or excuse me, X,
right.
after the supposed study that was released to them that said that they were actively being censored on the platform. Naturally, they came to the conclusion that it could only be some sort of puppet master show by Democrats in the background going around the guy who owns the platform. But if that ended up being an actual conflict, that would give me a lot of relief going into this year.
That would bum me out because then we wouldn't get that S tier content from Alex Jones.
Well, but it would only bolster both of them, though. I mean, at the end of the day, they're both huge narcissists, but they also both want to make a ton of money and they want to get a ton of engagement. And the fact that somebody like Elon is actively like yelling at his engineers and his data analysts because he can't figure out why his engagement continues to plummet. He might just pull something out of his hat. This might be the thing out of the hat. I think it would be great.
I wonder how that would play out. AJ versus Elon. Fight of the century.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly, we didn't get Elon versus Zuckerberg, so maybe this is the next best thing.
Maybe. I wonder what all the conspiracies about drinking adrenochrome and turning people into robots and Illuminati mental slavery and gay frogs in water that we would get with Alex Jones versus Elon.
One can only dream.
Like Mars is actually a colony where they're gonna take you and harvest your organs and turn you into like the Borg from Star Trek, but you're actually gonna be able like to be a you're only gonna be able to work for Elon because like technically the parts that they put in you are like Tesla property or some I don't know, some crazy.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum has actually deemed Elon Musk the Prime Minister of Mars, and he's going to have dominion over an entire planet. And people will only realize this once it's too late.
Oh yeah, that's wild. Well, on that, I think it's a great place for us to stop. Again, for anybody watching, go ahead and like the video, comment, give us structured comments if possible, share the video. We should have another episode up within a week or so, hopefully this time next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everybody who gave us a listen. Hopefully this is the first of many episodes to come. That would be the intention. Really looking forward to hearing any feedback that anyone has. Obviously, episode ones always tend to be, a little choppy, a little hit miss here and there. So, as was said earlier, constructive criticism would be ideal, but we want to hear from you anyway. The whole point is that we're trying to build community here because we both have a common sentiment that we think that that's one of the things that's going to drive everything forward in a positive direction. So definitely get involved, get engaged. Even if you think that what we're saying is completely absurd and laughable, please share it with all the people that you know, because we want as many people getting a part of the conversation as we can.
Yeah, listen to these two idiots. Share it with your friend.
Exactly.
All right, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and we will catch you guys next time.